repetition. I'm going to invite Catherine Evans from Hayman Lawyers, former Assistant Commissioner, to launch a new NGO called, well, I won't spoil all the surprise. There is a new organisation which you will all be invited to join and contribute to and participate in, and which will constitute a really important addition, I think, to the public discourse on privacy. And then we'll get into our, I'll introduce our speakers, we'll get into our talk. But Catherine, please.
Thanks very much, John. Kia ora tātou, and thank you very much, John, for the opportunity to talk to you very briefly. I know some people were here in the previous session, so this will be repetitive. You can carry on drinking your coffee and just switch off for a couple of minutes. For those of you that weren't here, we're launching today the Privacy Foundation of New Zealand, which is a civil society group to assist in supporting individuals' rights within New Zealand. Our purpose is to advocate for the protection of privacy rights of New Zealanders by providing, our tagline is, independent, informed and fair public comment on privacy. We'll all be aware that whether it's big or small, businesses, government departments, individuals ourselves, the way in which we participate on social media, it seems like everybody wants to control and use our personal information. And we have figured that it's probably long overdue for New Zealand to join our compatriots overseas and our colleagues overseas, people like the Australian Privacy Foundation, the civil society groups that exist in the United States and in the United Kingdom. It's about time that we had a homegrown privacy foundation of our own. So we're launching that today. Our website, which I don't have here, but it's very easy. It's privacyfoundation.nz. So just go to privacyfoundation.nz and you can find out a little bit more about us. We're a volunteer group. We are completely separate from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. Our views may sometimes differ from theirs, but we expect to complement their work by sort of standing outside the system and to be able to support individuals and to speak out strongly for the rights of individuals. John commented earlier that actually it's really good to have somebody separate from the office. I know when I worked at the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, we often lamented the lack of a civil society group that was really sort of devoted to speaking out on privacy issues. It's incredibly useful sort of elsewhere just to have that touchstone for discussion and debate, and to challenge the Privacy Commissioner's Office occasionally on things that we thought we needed to be challenged on, or at least to have another view in there. I don't anticipate a lot of challenging going on. I fully expect that often we will be on exactly the same page. But we'd like individuals from all walks of life to have a look, business, government, health, education, to join in and help us if that is what you'd like to do. You'll find it's easy to join us on our website. It's $40 per year for an individual or $20 for students, so we've kept the subs really low. We'd also welcome donations from organisations, and we're particularly grateful to those who've already joined in, which is HealthLink and TradeMe. Our motto, as I said, is independent, informed and fair public comment, and that will include doing research and producing publications on various things from time to time. So if you're in the audience and you have concerns but you can't speak out yourself on occasion, or it's too awkward, we would welcome you suggesting to us topics that you think the Privacy Foundation should comment on. However, if you're employed, we suggest that you stay within the terms of your employment agreement when you're doing so, which provides a segue through to our speakers today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Catherine. So get on there to Privacy Foundation and join up. One of the most common privacy issues across the economy is, of course, employment. You know, different privacy considerations apply in the health sector, in the finance sector, in credit reporting. But the one common feature across all enterprises and organisations is employment. We are today launching a set of employment modules which recognise the importance of privacy in employment and our responsibility to make it easy for you to access good information and for your staff and colleagues to have good information about what your rights are as employees and what your obligations are as employers. So you can find those on our website. They've been developed in conjunction with Learning Works in Waikato, and you will be able to do those in chunks as you progress, and you'll get your privacy badge at the end of it saying what an excellent privacy person you are. So that joins our suite of Privacy 101, Health Privacy 101. You'll be building up a solid base of credentials. That will help you solve quite a lot of the questions that come up on a day-to-day basis in terms of privacy and employment. What you don't find there, you might find on Ask Us. But when you get to the end of those free options and you've got a privacy problem, you need professional advice. And that's where our speakers today, Susan Hornsby-Gillett and Blair Scotland, founding partners of Dundas Street, which was the employment law firm which in 2016 was recognised as employment law firm of the country, I believe. Of the universe. So we're very grateful to them for coming along and sharing their wisdom for free, which is being beamed out across the internet to everyone in the world, not quite the universe, but anyone is able to subscribe to our Twitter feed and see on Periscope a live stream of Blair and Susan's talk. So I will hand over to them. They have generously agreed to be available for free for an hour, and then for some questions. After that, you've got to bring your checkbook. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks so much. We're delighted to be here. I'm going to just kick off and hand it over to Blair and then come back at the end. But when I thought about presenting today, I thought what was happening in 1993 when the Privacy Act was first enacted. And one of the things I do know is that there was concern about what was happening with technology and how that would affect information privacy. And I know that because my father at the time was the general manager of the Wanganui Computer Centre, and he was going up and down from Wanganui to Wellington drafting this thing called the Privacy Act. So I basically feel like I practically wrote it myself. So that's kind of interesting, but they did draft it in terms of principles. And there are various good reasons why there are not a lot of specifics in the Privacy Act. One of which, of course, is, 25 years ago, who thought we would be where we are in terms of technology? You couldn't possibly anticipate that. So in some ways, I guess the Privacy Act has done quite well to keep up as well as it has with technology. There is, of course, a review that I was just talking to Katrina about being undertaken, and there may be changes to the Privacy Act in the next year or so, but it is what it is at the moment. The other interesting thing I think about the Privacy Act, and probably something that escapes some of us, is that there is no right to privacy in New Zealand. So for those of you who are thinking about what that might mean, is there is a right, of course, to freedom of expression, freedom of association, some of those things which are enshrined in the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, but no right to privacy. What it is, in fact, is a privacy interest, which, in terms of the Privacy Act, then gets weighed up against other interests in terms of public interest factors, etc. So because of that, and the fact that the Privacy Act is written in terms of principles, a lot of the time it comes down to a balancing exercise and an exercise as to what feels right in weighing all these competing things. So what Blair and I are going to do today is basically talk to you about the vibe of the thing. That's probably as good as it gets. I'll talk to you about the vibe of the thing, and hopefully if you do have any questions, we'll be able to answer them. So I'll hand over to Blair and catch up with you in a sec.
Thank you, Susan. Can everyone hear me all right? Lovely. Look, very much in terms of approaching the topics for today, we thought, well, look, we pride ourselves hopefully on being intensely practical people and thinking about the various topics and how privacy and the employment jurisdiction interact. We very much endeavoured to focus on what are the key practical things to be aware of. What are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the unanswered questions? And this is essentially the little journey that we want to take you on today. We want to look at the two jurisdictions from an intensely practical perspective, an overarching practitioner's perspective of what are my options here, which way could I go? Do I jump in the employment area or the privacy area? Recruitment. I've specifically included recruitment in our discussion because it just comes up time and time again. I think, it's fascinating, isn't it, when you sort of think, look, we're 25 years on in this jurisdiction and privacy, and there are still employers in particular who get this stuff wrong. It's remarkable. So I don't think it's wasted time talking about these aspects of things. We've seen greater growth in particular areas that have a strong privacy focus, and drug and alcohol testing and work environments is one that we're seeing more and more issues. And I think there's a number of issues potentially unresolved in that area, but it's front of mind for a lot of employment practitioners, a lot of health and safety practitioners. Again, the privacy issue is not necessarily always totally understood. Disciplinary processes and surveillance issues, I'm going to turn over to Susan at that point in time, because there's a number of interesting issues in there. And it also, some of the topics in there reflect on some of the problems that the employment jurisdiction faces when it comes up with privacy issues and how some of those issues get resolved, and of course some other issues. So that's a very quick cook's tour of where we want to get you in the next hour or so. All right. So let's talk about the different jurisdictions. The key starting point in this respect is that the employment jurisdictions are not going to determine matters under the Privacy Act. They will use the Privacy Act and its principles as a potential guidance in terms of interpretation, in terms of determining whether, in particular, an employer's actions those open to a fair and reasonable employer in the particular circumstances. But if you are looking to pursue an employer in particular for breaches of privacy, the employment jurisdiction is not the one for you. And the case citation there is quite important. It's the one that the courts in the employment jurisdiction keep coming back to, the PSA and Southern Regional Council case. But it is an important interpretive tool. The other aspect to keep in mind, and Susan's going to talk about the case where this primarily came out, is that the Employment Relations Authority and Employment Court are not going to consider themselves necessarily to be bound by the Privacy Act. So one of the cases that Susan will touch off probably brings that into quite stark contrast. And for many practitioners, probably not so much as a shock, but somewhat of a surprise as to the approach that the Employment Court took. Certainly I remember hearing a presentation from the two practitioners on either side of the particular case called Massey, and they both expressed their interest and surprise that the lengths that the Employment Court went to in saying, look, we don't, yes, we've heard from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, but no, we're not going to follow what the Privacy Act requires. So, a really interesting case. So, this is a case example of where you get an employee wanting to pursue a case that's arguably better placed in the privacy jurisdiction. They tried to do this in the employment regime and failed. So Mr. Urquhart worked for Aviation Security, which is part of the Civil Aviation Authority. He resigned, received a conditional employment offer from Air New Zealand. Now, Air New Zealand, probably rather naughtily, as we'll get on to discuss, went and contacted his former employer. And that, as a result of that, we don't know quite what was said, but the offer of employment was then mysteriously withdrawn. Probably not very good things was said, is the suspicion. Now, Mr. Urquhart was obviously quite upset with his former employer, and he made various claims in the Employment Relations Authority, filed a statement of problem alleging that his terms of his employment agreement had been drawn, it had been breached, and that claiming a general unjustified disadvantage claim for breach of privacy. And the Employment Relations Authority didn't, in fairly short order, knocked those claims out. Said, well, look, these are matters that belong in the privacy jurisdiction. These are not employment-related claims. So it's an interesting one, because just quickly talking with John, Privacy Commissioner, before we started this session, it's interesting that determining which is the right jurisdiction and the desires of the jurisdiction to kick matters out that they don't believe are anything to do with them is quite an interesting test, an interesting process. But the case Urquhart is a prime example of where you see the authority clearly drawing that line and saying, look, this is just not an employment-related issue. So, what sort of things do we look at as practitioners when we're thinking about, well, where would you go? Which is the better option for my particular dispute here? These are some of the factors that come into play when we look at the privacy jurisdiction of making a point. I put cost up the front. I am a Scotsman by heritage. Cost is always an important thing. If I can avoid spending money, that's a good thing. As we know, to go online to make a complaint to the Office of the Privacy Commission and have them investigate, it's a free process. I mean, if we're using a lawyer, obviously there's a cost available to that. But as a layperson, that's a free process we can have to look to have our issues investigated. What I suspect a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate going into that process is the idea that the office is only ultimately going to make a recommendation at the end of that process. Now, it's often a very, very persuasive recommendation and does, in my experience, cause offending parties to sort of at least sit up and listen.